January 20th, 2026 marked 12 months since Donald Trump and J.D. Vance walked back into the White House. In that time, the tone toward America's long-standing allies has been completely different. At points, it has been outright hostile. At others, it has been narrow, transactional, and dismissive. Either way, it breaks with how U.S. presidents spent the last 80 years building alliances. Slow trust, long memory, and shared assumptions about right and wrong. And despite a large majority of both Republican and Democratic voters being in favor of both the U.S. commitments to NATO and its other allies, as well as aiding Ukraine against Russia, the current administration appears to be all in on destroying both America's standing in the world and its record-breaking lucrative defense sector one deal at a time. I'm Tuomas, a former officer in the Finnish Defense Forces, and in this episode we look at how the defense markets have responded to the current U.S. administration's foreign policy and how more and more allies are moving away from U.S. weaponry. We'll look at the winners in the stock markets, in the order books, and how these trends might affect the future. The degradation of the U.S. relationship to its allies hasn't been confined to one region. Europe has heard it. The Pacific has heard it. Even Canada has heard it. Public threats, private pressure, constant reminders that support is conditional, often based around what you can give the Trump family and network. That alliances are favors, not commitments. So the reaction hasn't been surprising. Because when allies start questioning whether spare parts, software access, or political backing depend on the mood in Washington that week, they don't wait around for reassurance. 12 months in from our initial video in this series, we're not predicting anymore. The results show up in contracts lost, procurement rules being set by America's allies to deliberately circumvent U.S. arms, and in how European and Pacific doctrine is changing, moving away from reliance on American weapons and support toward a posture where the old powers of the world are once again dusting off their old military playbooks. As a British fellow officer once told me in Afghanistan, you can generally tell how NATO and its allies trust the U.S. by the number of fighter jets it orders. Coincidentally, that metric held up remarkably well 15 years or so later. From the Obama years onward, fighter aircraft became the clearest expression of political alignment. Under Obama, foreign partners committed to roughly 300 F-35s, plus a myriad of other jets like the F-16, locking in Australia, Great Britain, Norway, Israel, Japan, South Korea, the Netherlands, and Denmark. It was the high water mark of Allied confidence in U.S. leadership and long-term reliability. That momentum carried into Trump's first term. Another 140 F-35s were committed as Belgium, Poland, and Japan expanded their orders. Despite the rhetoric, the pipeline still held. The assumption remained that access, sustainment, and political backing would ultimately endure. The sales of F-35s really peaked under Biden. Between 2021 and 2025, allies committed to roughly 290 additional jets. Finland, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, the Czech Republic, Romania, and Singapore all signed on, while others upped their orders. If there was any doubt about whether U.S. air power still anchored the alliance system, those contracts answered it. But that was then. Over the last year, things have really taken quite the opposite turn, especially after Trump openly stated that U.S. companies should sell downgraded or second-rate aircraft to allies. In that moment, what had once been an unspoken fear became reality. With a sales pitch like that, there was bound to be consequences, and the past year has seen a flurry of countries either opt out completely from the jet or severely downgrade their orders. Spain made the most decisive move. Madrid ruled out the F-35 entirely and shifted its future fighter planning back toward European options, narrowing the choice to Eurofighter upgrades in the short term and the Future Combat Air System program for the future. Portugal followed with public doubt. Senior officials openly questioned whether committing to the F-35 still made strategic sense, given U.S. political unpredictability and being openly hostile to staunch Portuguese allies, Denmark and Canada. Switzerland became more of a warning sign than a clean exit. The Swiss had signed on paper to buy 36 F-35s, but over the last year, the deal steadily unraveled into a political and financial problem. Rising costs triggered the first backlash after U.S. officials made clear The contract was not truly fixed price and could exceed the voter-approved budget by well over €1 billion. But cost alone wasn't the only factor. Relations with the Trump administration deteriorated when Washington slapped Swiss goods with some of the highest tariffs of any developed country, hitting watches, machinery, and other exports with a 39% levy that rocked Switzerland's export-heavy economy. If Washington was willing to impose punishing trade measures on a neutral country that in reality maintained a near-balanced trade relationship with the United States once services were included, it raised uncomfortable questions about how reliable the U.S. would be as a long-term defense partner. Faced with rising costs, domestic opposition, and a souring political climate, the Swiss government moved to cap spending, instructing the defense ministry to buy fewer jets within the original budget. What had once been presented as a clean, low-risk purchase turned into a scaled-back, contested order shaped as much by politics as by military need. And it didn't appear that this saga was over yet, with public opinion toward the United States taking a noticeable hit. Canada went further than even I expected. Ottawa had already formally ordered 16 F-35s and is legally committed to them. But in March 2025, the government launched a formal review of the remaining 72 jets amid rising political anger over U.S. trade tensions and broader strategic concerns. As part of that reassessment, Sweden's Saab came forward with a package proposing 72 Gripen fighters plus 6 GlobalEye surveillance aircraft, linked to an estimated 12,600 Canadian jobs if local production and sustainment work were established. While F-35 advocates still point to the aircraft's dominant performance in Canada's original competition and has warned of potential NORAD interoperability issues, the Gripen proposal offers a politically attractive economic narrative that resonates with a large part of both the Canadian public and political environment. As of the making of this episode, the review has not produced a final decision, and Canada is still weighing whether to proceed with the full F-35 fleet, adopt a mixed force, or pivot more fully toward the Gripen offer, leaving Canada's fighter future unresolved for now. I think it'll be a very hard pill to sell to the Canadian population to buy more than the 16, seeing as the U.S. controls so much of the supply chain and as U.S. politicians have proven themselves capable of using them as blackmail. Why would you use so much money on something from someone who is openly threatening you? It would be like Finland buying Russian jets. To make it worse, Lockheed Martin stated that the F-35 program supported roughly 290,000 U.S. jobs across the supply chain. In 2024, just over 110 aircraft were delivered globally. That worked out to roughly 2,600 U.S. jobs supported per aircraft delivered in that year. And while Lockheed Martin also produces HIMARS and other items that Europe is buying for Ukraine through the Pearl Initiative, its stock has barely held its ground. Compare this to its large European and Pacific competitors, and the picture gets even bleaker. Before we get to the order books, just looking at the stock values of the major European military aircraft companies makes the trend clear. Lockheed Martin is lagging behind almost every other Western jet manufacturer, and when you include the subsidiaries and suppliers of Lockheed's biggest competitors, the picture becomes even more pronounced. When you strip it back to confirmed sales since early 2025, the difference is hard to miss. Saab secured a 17-jet Gripen export deal with Colombia on top of its massive national Swedish upgrade program, while Dassault booked around 26 new Rafale export orders and continued to sit on a backlog of roughly 220 aircraft for foreign customers. Eurofighter added 20 new Typhoons for Germany as well as an expanded order for Spain, reinforcing the program's already deep European order book. South Korea ordered 40 F-21s, marking the aircraft's transition from development into serial production. By contrast, the F-35 saw very few new orders, and the issue seems to be that the few that were likely to go ahead have been stopped in their tracks, like the aforementioned Canada, Spain, and Switzerland deals. If I were a Lockheed Martin executive, I'd be very worried about how the current administration's foreign policy is affecting sales. Before we move on to other categories, I just want to clarify something. A loss of an F-35 order does not directly mean that one cancelled aircraft equals 2,600 layoffs in the US. Production could be backfilled, sustainment work continued, and the term jobs supported covers far more than final assembly. But it does mean that every avoided or reduced order removed thousands of job years of demand that has to be replaced somewhere else or absorbed, and you can see it in Lockheed Martin's stocks. Since November of last year, its stock has behaved like a yo-yo despite pumping out HIMARS systems and ammunition for Ukraine at big rates for European customers. That fall in the stock price is almost entirely bound to its fighter jets, and if you pair that with the record low jobs reports coming out of the US, you can see how dire this situation could become for entire communities. I could go deep into the airborne early warning market, but the short version is this. One of the real drivers behind Saab's extreme stock increase is the GlobalEye platform. The United Arab Emirates received its last of 5 aircraft in early 2025, Sweden ordered 3 more, and by late 2025, France ordered 2 with options for 2 more, bringing GlobalEye to at least 8 aircraft delivered or firmly contracted in just a year. The US answer to this, Boeing, moved the other way. In 2025, the US Air Force scrapped the E-7 Wedgetail program over cost and survivability concerns. Without the US as an anchor customer, the program stalled and looks on the rocks. While Saab kept delivering aircraft and winning orders, Boeing's flagship effort lost momentum. If we move over to land warfare, 2025 saw some of the most expansive European growth since the Cold War. On top of Europe's trillion-euro rearmament came a continued expansion of European manufacturers' deliveries to Ukraine. While I can't go into the same depth in this episode as our initial series, I'll just mention the large successes and summarize market performance at the end of the segment. European armor programs have consolidated around upgrades and new builds that keep production lines busy for decades ahead. The Leopard 2A8 has emerged as the backbone of that effort, with confirmed purchases from 5 European nations pushing the current backlog to roughly 350 tanks, before options and follow-on tranches are even counted. Alongside that, Sweden is upgrading 110 existing older Stridsvagns to the new Stridsvagn 123 standard, further locking in long-term workload for the Leopard ecosystem. The UK has taken a different route, committing to upgrading 148 Challenger 2s to Challenger 3, modernizing firepower and electronics while focusing squarely on domestic capability rather than exports. France has followed a similar logic, ordering 200 Leclerc upgrades to keep its heavy armor relevant well into the 2030s. And just behind these programs sit the next generation. Rheinmetall's KF Panther remains in the wings with industrial backing and serious interest in Italy and Hungary, while Poland's K2 Black Panther program is already moving at scale through large orders in South Korea, with local production expected to start in Poland later this year. And, as you're probably guessing, these tank orders, on top of everything else these companies are already producing, are powering their market performance in a big way. The surge in KNDS and Rheinmetall Leopard commitments has pushed both firms into record backlog territory, with Rheinmetall alone sitting at roughly 63 billion euros, locking in production well into the next decade. Sweden's Stridsvagn upgrades and France's Leclerc modernization feed directly into those same company pipelines, while Britain's Challenger 3 program runs through Rheinmetall BAE Systems land and into BAE Systems' already massive order book. And the company behind the K2 Black Panther, Hyundai Rotem, has also seen a frankly explosive rise, driven by large export orders from multiple countries. From there, the story carries straight over into artillery, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers. And I won't bore everyone by listing the same company names again, because in this segment, that's largely the case. CV-90 is by far the most widely sold infantry fighting vehicle of the group. The French Caesar stands out as the most successful European artillery system by export numbers. And Finland's Patria, through its AMV platform, has quietly become one of the biggest winners in the armored vehicle space over the past few years. I could keep going through more land systems, but the story doesn't really change. I've genuinely struggled to find a major publicly traded European defense company that's had a bad year in 2025. And while stock prices are one thing, the order books tell the same story. Record-breaking backlogs, full production lines, and work locked in for years. For an ever more hostile United States, that's where this starts to hurt. In 2024, well over 2.6 million Americans worked in defense-related production. Those jobs are massively affected by exports, and when the U.S. allies starts looking elsewhere for their defense procurement, a lot of those jobs will disappear. While the U.S. can probably maintain some of the jobs with domestic demand, the cash cow that has been its allies is getting more and more alienated by the day. The important part is this. None of this is because American equipment stopped working. It's because trust stopped being predictable. Allies started worrying about politics, trade pressure, and whether today's partner might become tomorrow's problem. And, as predicted, the recent Greenland threats shows just that. Trump didn't push allies away in one dramatic moment. He pushed us to hedge, to invest at home, to build systems we control ourselves. And once Europe, Canada's, and the Pacific's factories are built, they don't easily get dismantled again. So, 12 months on, the impact, as we predicted in early 2025, has been staggering. For the US, it's there in the contracts that never got signed, the exports that quietly went elsewhere, and the industrial work that shifted out of the US's system. Now, I realize that I haven't covered much naval progress in this video, so if there's appetite for that, let me know in the comments and we can do a follow-up video on the naval market. As always, you can find the links to the videos mentioned in this episode in the comments and description. Have a good weekend, wherever you are.